So one of the shows up in L.A., there was a riot, right? Elks.
Oh yeah,
were you there
St.
for
Patrick's
that?
Day? Yeah, I was there.
Well, tell me about that.
It was I think it was for The Mask. I think Brendan Mullen had put it together, and it was at the Elks Lodge in downtown LA, next to MacArthur Park. And there was a lot of bands playing. The Go-Go's were on the bill. I think X was on the bill. We were on the bill. Who else was Plugs? Possibly the Alley Cats. I mean, it was like almost like a whole day thing, you know. Gonna be like a lot of bands. And, when we got there, I remember my parents went to it because I flew down to San Diego. I was living in San Francisco at the time. I flew down to San Diego with my girlfriend at the time, Holly. And then my parents and Holly and I drove up to LA because they wanted to go to the show. And we drove up to the thing. And then we're hanging out. And I think we were either the second or third band on the bill. And after us, I think it was going to be the Go-Go's before they were really like, you know, popular.
Yeah.
And so we played. And then Holly and I were like, let's get it, you know, let's go walk around, whatever, you know. So we left. We got out of the building and we were walking along MacArthur Park, and we found this bar, and it was St. Patrick's Day, right? So there's people in there drinking, and I remember so funny. There was all these Japanese businessmen with this giant button that said "Kiss me, I'm Irish," and I thought it was the funniest thing. So it was just too hilarious. Oh man, it was so funny. And so we were in there for a while, and we were like, okay, let's head back. And we're walking back to the Elks Lodge, and here's like, I mean, in formation, these cops walking, boom, 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 like just blocking a whole street. And I'm like, oh shit, what's going on? Did they find a Night Stalker or somebody? Because he was around at the time, you know. And then we happened to just sort of walk into the park and around that bunch of cops, and then we started trying to get close to the entryway, and we saw there was all this mayhem, you know. And I was like, I said to Holly, you know what, we better just sort of maybe, you know, lay low. We're here somewhere and stay away from this. And then finally, everything, they dissipated, the cops went away and everything, and some people were hurt. And then the people that were in the auditorium where the concert took place, they stayed in there. You know, my parents were in there, you know.
Oh, wow.
That was crazy. And then finally, the coast was clear. We went in there, got my parents, and then we went and stayed at a hotel. And it was like maybe 2 or 3 days later, and then the newspaper came out, you know, and it was like, oh, punks riot at Elks Lodge, which was not the case. Apparently, later on, it got discovered that the mayor of LA didn't want the punk scene to really grow any bigger. You know, they were trying to suppress it somehow, and that's why all that happened. And some of the, I know the guys from Middle Class, I think it was the singer and his brother, they got beat up by the cops. Yeah,
probably a lot of people did.
Yeah, a lot of people did, man. It was crazy. But yeah, that's what I remember. But I mostly remember the Japanese guys claiming that they were Irish. Kiss me, I'm Irish. That's the funniest thing I've ever seen, man. And they were having a good old time.
So you left the Zeros a little bit in the 70s for like a year or
70,
something?
Yeah, spring of 78. Yeah, we had been playing pretty steadily for a year almost. And one thing I started to do from the very beginning was I was logging. I had a logbook where I put, okay, Zeros played at this place on this day with this band. We got paid that much.
Oh, really?
Religiously doing that.
Wow.
You know, I don't know. I just had time in my hands, and I just want to keep track. And so, you know, we did have a rehearsal space that we paid for, and there were expenses like gasoline to get to LA and whatever. Because by a certain time, Javier was driving us to LA, but in the beginning it was Baba's dad would drive us to LA.
I was going to ask you, who drove you to all the gigs?
Yeah,
it
was Baba's dad, and he had a Ford LTD wagon with the wood paneling on the sides, and we'd cram in there with all the equipment, and he'd drive us up to LA. Now Baba's parent, Mr. Frank Chanel, he passed away a few years ago, but he used to be a National City policeman, then he became a homicide detective. But he was very supportive of the band, like you wouldn't believe. We owe that man a lot. And would drive us up there, and I remember Baba would tell him, "Man, Dad, it's not cool for parents to hang out, man. Can you pick us up later?" And he'd leave, goes, "Yeah, okay, I'll be back," you know. And yeah, it was so funny, and he'd always come back and, you know, get us and go back to San Diego. But what happened was then Javier was at an age where he finally got his license and he could drive, so then he'd be the guy driving, you know, and we'd go up there and play. Well, I'm sorry, I totally got sidetracked.
It's okay. I was asking, you quit for about a year.
Yeah. So getting back to the logbook, I had all this information, and I remember I was like, well, we're not really, you know, splitting the money. It's been being held by Javier. I understand the rental of the space and I understand the gas, but there definitely was surplus money. And I mean, we were just going to school. We didn't have jobs. So, you know, I wanted to get maybe a set of new bass strings, some sneakers, something. So I would call him. I say, hey, man, you know, can I get $20? I want to get some bass strings or whatever. And then he was always like, well, yeah, I don't really have the money right now. No, or he always never wanted to just let it go. Mm. And it got to the point where I just felt like, I don't know. I mean, I'm doing all this, and yeah, I'm a team member, yay team, but still, you know, we got to do stuff here for everybody individually. And then basically, one time we were coming back from LA, like at 2 a.m. after playing, probably at the Whiskey or somewhere. We stopped at a Denny's in Oceanside, and Robert got up from the table. He goes to the bathroom, and while he's in the bathroom, Javier starts asking me and Baba, what do you think about Robert when he's moving all over the stage and jumping around with the guitar while we play? I said, I think it's great, you know. I mean, he's just having a good time, you know. And for some reason that bothered Javier, that it was stealing his spotlight. And that's the first time I ever caught that behavior from him, you know. And then, but yeah, so it got to the point where I just felt like I'm not going to keep doing this for nothing. So I'm going to go away. I don't want to play in the band. And the other thing that was very attractive to me around that time was that we had already been in LA for about a year, playing a lot. We made tons of friends with the punks and everything. So it was very like appealing to me to go be part of that, you know. Like it was like Disneyland, punk Disneyland. I could go over there and really have fun because there's nothing going on in San Diego. So I said, I'm going to move to LA. And I mean, I was 17, man, you know, I had no money, you know, how am I going to do this? And then one of the last gigs that we did as a 4-piece with me on the bass, Posh Boy from Posh Boy Records, approached me and said, hey, you know, I got this band that I'm putting together. It's called F-Word. And we need a bass player. So the light went on in my head. I said, oh, I'll work out a deal with this guy. If he moves, I'll tell him that I'll play bass in F-Word if he really relocates me to San Diego. So I said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll play bass for your band if you come down to San Diego and get me up to LA. And he said, yeah. So he drove down in his Pinto station wagon, and we threw in, you know, whatever little stuff I had, bass amp and bass guitar and some clothes, and moved up to LA. He moved me up to LA, and then I became the bass player in F-Word for a while. And we used to like practice in East, all the way heading out towards like Glendale somewhere. There's Rick lived out there somewhere on the east side of town, and so we practiced. Maybe did a few gigs, and then I quit. So I wasn't really like getting into the music too much at that point, you know. And so that's how I moved to LA. And then I lived in the Canterbury.
Oh, which is with the Go-Go's?
Yeah, when I moved in there, I was squatting in a studio that was sealed from the hallway. It was sealed, but my friend Rod Sargent, he was renting a apartment there, and his kitchen had a door that opened up to that sealed studio. You know, you couldn't get into it through the hallway, but you could get into it through his apartment because we jammed open that door. So I would go through his apartment to get to my place. Oh. Did that for like a couple of months. And then the landlord found out. He was a supposed pastor, but I think that was just and he says, oh, I know you're sleeping in that empty room for free, in that empty studio, but I'll make you a deal if you help me like refresh the empty apartments and studios and paint and stuff and clean, you can stay there for free. And I said, wow, well, that's a pretty good deal. I'll do that for a while,
And you knew how to paint.
Yeah. So I was like, so it worked out pretty good. But yeah, when I moved in there, Nikki B and Alice Bagg were in a relationship. Nikki B, the drummer for the Weirdos, and Alice lived together up on the 6th floor. And then Belinda Carlisle and Lorna Doom, the bass player in the Germs, were roommates. They rented a room there, an apartment. Who else was living there? Michael Sinatra and Chase were roommates. I had a big crush on Chase. She was a beautiful, tall blonde girl, but Michael was this little, Italian-looking guy, and apparently it turned out he was gay, and he had a big crush on me. And I was like, okay, well, I don't go down that road, but we can be friends. We can stay friends, and everything was cool. But yeah, the Canterbury was amazing in that sense. But at the same time, they were, I think, Laotian refugees living there. There were bikers living there. So it was like a mishmash of society's rejects and things, and it was kind of crazy. But that's why punks live there too, I guess. Gesa X lived down on the first floor. Yeah, he lived down there. And so we'd run into all these, we'd all run into each other, hang out. The Mass was a block away on the same street, on Cherokee, and then you cross Hollywood Boulevard going south, and then half a block, and there's the Mass to the right. So we just walk to the gates.
So any stories about Belinda from the Go-Go's or anything like that you can tell?
Well, there's one, but it's private.
Okay.
No, but anyway. No, but I do remember one night we were all hanging out in somebody's apartment, and then we found out that there was this party out near the Chateau Marmont in somebody's apartment out there in that area, right? And we're like, okay, let's go crash it. So, like 2 cars full of people, punks, we all climbed in these 2 cars and drove up there. I think it was John Doe who told us about that party because they got invited, him and Nick Scene. So we were like, okay, we're going to go crash it. And then we get in there, and Saturday Night Live was on TV. It was, and that was like the big show at the time. Everybody's all excited about Saturday Night Live. And so all these people are hanging around on the floor, on the sofa, drinking, watching this TV, and we just walk in, and make ourselves at home and go straight to the fridge and start pulling out beers and stuff. And John Doe was there with Exene hanging out at the balcony. And we talked to him for a little bit, and then the owner realized, I don't think I know these people, and so he comes over and goes, who are you friends with, blah, blah, blah. We're like, well, Johnny told us to come, whatever, we made up some name. Yeah. And then we just like, okay, grab a beer and get the fuck out of here. So grab beer from the fridge and left. And then we ended up in some art gallery. They were having it was like African, like folk art, with spears and shields and masks with feathers and things. I remember by then we were really buzzed. And I started grabbing a spear, and this guy came over. This curator guy freaked out. Don't touch that, put that back. And I was hanging out with Belinda and Lorna during that time right there, that night. And then we ended up going to the Tropicana, and our friend Craig Lee, who used to be the guitar player in the Bags, it was his birthday, and I guess he rented a room at the Tropicana, and they were having a party there, so we went and crashed that too. And I remember we made a mess out of the cake. It was a chocolate cake, but it was not going to last too long once we got there. We were just out of control that night. It was really fun. I remember that.
I was wondering if, did you ever meet John Belushi? He was in the punk scene with the Dead Boys at least.
Yeah, right, yeah. No, I never did meet John Belushi. I met Joey Ramone at the Whiskey. Who else?
Oh wow! Yeah. So tell me about that.
Well, we were in we were in Hollywood again, like a day early. I think we were playing on Saturday night, but we would always go up there like on a Friday, and hang out. And we stayed at Tropicana, and we were on the 3rd floor, and then you could look from the hotel window, like like it was a courtyard. And down, there's a pool in the center of the courtyard there. And Robert and I were like, hanging out in the hotel room, and Bob and Javier too, whatever. But then Robert walks up and looks over the railing. He goes, "Oh, the Ramones are hanging out by the pool, man."
Oh, wow.
And I'm all like, "What the fuck?" And yeah, and I'm looking over there, and they had little Speedos and their T-shirts hanging out, lounging. And he's like, "Let's go talk to them." And I'm like, "No, I don't want to bother them. I don't want to bother them." And eventually we just kind of like let it go. So, okay. And then we headed out to the whiskey. And we get to the whiskey and we meet Ronnie Bingenheimer at the door. And we'd already known him a little bit. And so he's saying hi to everybody. And then I was the last one to say hi to him. And then we started talking, "Oh, how you doing? Blah, 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 yeah. And he's all like, "Hey, you want to meet Joey Ramone?" And I'm like, "What?" The guy who didn't want to bother them.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I said, well, I thought to myself, well, he's inviting me, so I'll say yes on this one. And yeah, he was hanging out on the second level of the whiskey with a beer in his hand. He goes, "Hey, Joey, this is Hector from the Zeros," and shook his hand. I said, "I love your music, man. You got a great band, And he said, "Oh, thank you very much." And I just walked away. I was like, I'm not gonna walking away, be cool about it, But yeah, that's how I met him. He was really nice.
So, when did you get back? You got back into the Zeros like a year later after quitting.
It wasn't even.
How did that happen?
It wasn't even really a year. I think it was in Hollywood for the spring of '78. I remember that. I was there for maybe 3 to 4 months, but it seemed like forever. But I ended up sitting in with Black Randy in the Metro Squad a couple of times while I lived there, because he would basically make his band out of other musicians in other bands, And I remember he had a gig at the Whiskey, and I need a guitar player. You want to play a guitar? I was like, yeah, all right, So I used to like his music because he's such a nut. But then what happened was I was living in Hollywood, and my dad used to live in Long Beach, and he lived in Wilmington, which is a real Mexican ghetto, like not really a best neighborhood, but he would come up to on Hollywood once every other weekend, and we'd meet for breakfast. But then he started bugging me like, "I don't know what you're doing up here. You should come and live with me, and you can get a job down here." No. So he finally talked me into it, and I guess maybe I was a little bit over the whole, running around in Hollywood. And so I moved in with him. I had an uncle who used to be the regional manager for Chief Auto Parts all over LA, so I had a nepotism in the making there. So he got me a gig at a Chief Auto Part in Long Beach. I knew nothing about cars, but I was running the register. And then, but then my dad's all like, "Well, now that you've got a job, you can pitch in for the rent." Now here's the deal: he was living with his second wife, the one that he left my mom for and already had 2 kids with, and he wanted me to help support that. And I was sleeping in the living room, in the sofa, and I was like, wait a minute. I said to myself, this is not going to work. Not like that. If I live there for free, it's one thing, but now you want me to help? Nope. So then I had to devise a plan, and then right around that time, Baba called me up. Because him and I had met before, and he had my number there at that house. And he says, "Hey man, the Zeros got an offer to do a summer tour up to Seattle and back." That was the summer of '78. He says, "Do you want to play again?" I said, "Yeah, of course." Because then I was like, I got to figure out a way to get the fuck out of Long Beach. Because that was going to be my out. And then and I asked him at that point, I said, "Is Robert in it too?" Because by then Robert had left too, and he had moved to LA. And he goes, "Yeah, Robert's going to play." I said, "Okay, well, great. It'll be the 4 of us again." And then I took a Greyhound from Long Beach down to San Diego, got to my mom's house, and I saw this should be a Netflix miniseries because my mom had a '66 Ford Mustang that my stepdad had bought her, right? Really nice 289 V8 with coupe automatic, and I knew how to drive, but I didn't have a driver's license. I was 17 still, and then I devised this plan. I'm gonna tell my mom that I'm borrowing the Mustang so I can go hang out at Baba's house, because Baba's parents and my parents lived like 3 minutes away on the street. We lived East National City, and he lived about 4 blocks from my house. So I said, I'm gonna go to Baba's house and hang out. Can I take the car? She goes, yeah, okay. And then she gave me $5 and says, oh yeah, by the way, on your way back, get a loaf of bread and a liter of Pepsi. I said, all right. But, I was going to L.A., man. So I go pick up Baba because Baba already knew the plan. And he got in the car, and we started driving to L.A., in the car. And I thought, okay, by the time I get back, I'll make it on time, and Mom won't know. And it only got worse. So, we drive up there, get to my dad's house. I start putting all my junk in the Mustang, but I still had to go from Long Beach to Eagle Rock because I had a bass amplifier stored out there in Eagle Rock with Dave Drive, who was the drummer in what became the Gears. Because I ended up playing with those guys for a little bit too while I was there. Yeah, they were called the LA Shakers at the time. And because Dave Drive was him and I made really good friends, and he asked me one time, you and Frank and I, let's play, let's call it the LA Shakers. So I did that a little bit. That's why I had the bass amp up there. So I'm making my way up there, and the car dies on me. And we pulled off. Luckily, we just coasted off the exit, hit a gas station, and the guy says, yeah, you blew up your engine. There's no oil in it. And I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? It's not my car. I'm not supposed to be in Long Beach. What am I going to do?
Oh, boy.
And I had $500 cash. I remember that I had saved from having worked at the auto parts store. And Bob and I are talking about this whole situation. Like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And then these two Mexican guys overheard our, situation while we were talking. And they go, we got a car for sale. It's $500. And I thought, well, shit, I got $500. I said, well, what kind of car? He goes, so 68 Chevy Nova. Had I known back then, because they became extremely collectible.
Oh, really?
But not at that time. They were just whatever cars. And so they drove us to where the car was. We just drove it. It seemed to run fine. I said, okay, well, here's the money. Give me the title, and signed it over. And then we got in, and then we left the Mustang at the gas station. And we'll figure with that later, because not much anymore, but back in those days, a lot of gas stations had repair shops and they had garages and guys working on stuff. So I said, well, I'll just leave it here for now. And the gas station guys were cool about it. And I said, well, get it later. And then we get in the Nova, we go back to my dad's house. Oh, we go get the amp in Eagle Rock, go back to my dad's house. It was already getting really late. So we thought, well, we'll leave the next morning. And by then, I called my mom. I said, I got to tell you something.
Oh, no.
Oh, man. She was mad.
Oh, boy.
You are so lucky that your stepdad's in Hawaii, because he was a naval base inspector. That he's out in Hawaii inspecting naval bases. Otherwise, he'll have a shit fit.
Oh,
and I was like, okay. So we got to get that car back here before he shows up, before he comes back to San Diego. I'm like, oh, my God. So the next morning, and then my dad was all like, I'm going to catch a ride with you guys down to Tijuana, because I got to go down there, blah, 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 blah. So he comes with us, and he's driving the Nova, and we're going down by Camp Pendleton, and then we got a flat tire.
Oh, jeez.
And so then my dad's all like, oh, where's the key to the trunk? Oh, we didn't get one. We just have the ignition key. And there's a crowbar in the back of the driver's seat. So he grabs the crowbar, he's all mad. He's like, oh, pops open the trunk, and he pulls out the spare. The lug pattern is the wrong lug pattern for the Chevy. It was like for a different kind of car. So he got really pissed. I go, I gotta get to TJ sure now, or I'm just gonna hire, thumb a ride, and you guys take care of it. And he left us there, and he just took off, and I was like, fuck, it's only getting worse.
Yeah.
Day, and then I'm standing there next to the car, by the freeway, and I see the CHP way and coming closer and closer. I said, oh, fuck. And we didn't have driver's license, right? Oh, my God. So I thought, okay, I'll pretend that I'm changing the tire real quick, and I grab a crowbar and whatever, and I'm like, and the CHP guy he doesn't even get out of the car. He just kind of like, hey, you guys okay? Like that, he parked behind me. So, yeah, I'm just changing the tire, officer. We're good. And he took off. And I'm
wow.
Man, that was close. And then the Mexican guy showed up in a Mustang, like early, late 70s Mustang. It was a funny looking one. I remember it had like little blue tassels hanging off the ceiling. It was really weird, off the roof. And then, so they gave us a ride to a gas station with the spare tire that didn't fit. And at the gas station, they had tires, and so we swapped it for the right kind and paid like $5, $10, I can't remember. And then this old man in a truck drove us back to the car, and then we got home.
Wow.
And it was really getting really late, and my mom's like, we gotta go get that car right now. So then, you know, the U-Haul was still open. We ran out of the U-Haul, got a hitch and tow, and drove straight back up to Long Beach. It was insane.
Yikes. But you survived.
Yes.